Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Jivamaya Yoga Wisdom Talks. And this afternoon, we're going to be welcoming Anjali Deva, who is, who is this amazing young soul who has the wisdom of at least twice her age, if not more, with Ayurveda. And it's just such a pleasure. Um, she may not want me to mention this, but I am going to mention that this is the first full day of her third decade. So I am really, really honored that she's spending this day with us. Anjali is an Ayurvedic practitioner in Los Angeles, and she really, the word Ayurveda means the science of life, but actually, I think Anjali really shows us that it's the science of living so that you can really adapt it to yourself and to the times. And I think the times right now are calling for a lot of adapting. So without further ado, I want to introduce Anjali and start off with, this is the last of our conversations on food for a while anyway. So we started with Almadea, as you know, with some beautiful wisdom, and Carrie Clasby from the farm to tell us about soil and that importance of fresh harvesting and what to look for when you're at the farmers market. And Sonia last week, everyone seems to be really turning to their roots and to acknowledging what it is that their parents, grandparents, great grandparents went through to bring us this incredible country. So we were expressing that whole idea and thought through food, and now we wrap it up with Anjali. So many questions. You know, why do we eat? How do we eat? What do we eat? When do we eat? So I think the why do we eat is pretty obviously we need to sustain ourselves, but sustainability is not necessarily a given fact by just putting some food into your mouth. So, Anjali, what question would you like to start with after this? Start with the when or the how or the what?
Well, that's a good question. Maybe we should start with the why. Why do we eat?
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Um, well, I was thinking about it when you texted me, and I think we eat for sustainability and we eat for nourishment. And if we look at Ayurveda, we eat to feed all of our tissue systems and our ojas, our immune system. So we're nourishing not only our body through food, but the spirit and the mind and our emotions and so many other things as well. So I think why we eat is not often something that we give a lot of thought to. And so I think even just meditating on that before we sit down for a meal starts to bring us into that conversation of how to eat, right? Because I think so much of the time we're eating A, very quickly, and B, very distracted. I mean, I'm totally guilty of eating in the car. Most of my clients are guilty of eating while texting or watching television or having a heated argument with their husband. Um, but just eating is something that we very rarely do, right? I remember the first time I went on the Vipassana 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I was sitting down to eat, and I remember thinking, like, what am I supposed to do here? I'm just going to sit and eat. And so that kind of like intense mindful attention is so beautiful as to how we should eat when we sit down and we eat our food and bring our full, complete sensory attention to it with that practice of mindfulness of what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, you know, how the sound of it is and how it feels, because each food has such a different life and spirit to it that if we can bring that kind of really subtle, gentle awareness, even if it's just for the couple first bites, I think it makes such a difference to the way that we digest because it brings us into the present moment, which means that we can't be in as much of a stress response. We can't be in our heightened fight or flight if we're in the present moment. So
And we could
that
also
answers a little bit of how.
responds, right? Because there are foods that we may desire, but our body. I remember that wonderful Krishnamurti's chef wrote a book, and he said that once he had Krishnamurti came into the kitchen and said, "What are you serving for dinner?" And he told him pasta, yada yada yada. And he said, "Oh, that's beautiful. What are you serving for dessert?" And the chef said chocolate souffle, and Krishnamurti looked at him very seriously and said, "We don't eat chocolate." So that we, the body and I have had this discussion, and it's like, no, chocolate is not available to us anymore. So that's part of that how, right? That understanding in the food, yeah.
Yeah, part of that how, and I think also our decision-making process, because sometimes when we're out of balance, we crave what keeps us out of balance, right? So like when I feel stressed, I often think about comfort foods like pizza or mac and cheese, which are actually leading to more imbalance, which is the sustainability that you're talking about. As opposed to when I feel really balanced and healthy and whole, I crave much different foods, and that sensation in that place that I'm craving from is very different. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe when?
Mhm.
Big question of when.
Right. So, I can hear my dad's voice in my head talking about the whens. And so, I always remember him talking about vatas should eat 4 to 5 small meals throughout the day. So if you've got this like windy, effervescent, restless energy that might be feeling like gas, bloating, constipation, more frequent, smaller meals, because our tendency with vata imbalance is to go through the day either forgetting to eat or snacking on popcorn or chips all day long and not really actually sitting down for that wholesome meal. So that would be one. If you tend to have a really strong digestive fire, maybe overactive, then a bigger meal at lunchtime, 2 smaller meals to keep you kind of grounded throughout the day, and to make sure that that really big lunchtime is there because that's when your digestion is the strongest. And if you've got a really kind of slow, sluggish digestion that isn't treating you so well in that moment, cutting down your meals to maybe 2 small to moderately sized meals. So I think it's a question of getting to know your digestive system individually a little bit and the rate at which it digests. Is it slow? Is it erratic? Or is it overactive? If we think about it with that kind of lens, then we have a better opportunity to understand what our body needs. Does it need more time? Does it need smaller meals? Does it need less at once? So much of the time we're putting in more than we actually can digest.
Yeah, there are many people who are becoming aware of the fact that Las Vegas is not going to be having buffets anymore. Talk about loading up on a plate with your eyes bigger than your stomach. So the when becomes really, really important. And does that change with the seasons? Or do we really go by the digestive system?
It can definitely change with the seasons, and what we see in the summertime is that actually our Agni, our digestive fire, tends to go down a little bit because most of our heat is going out to the skin to help you sweat, to stay cool. So your internal Agni, your internal digestive fire actually gets a little bit depleted. So we still want to eat within those timeframes, but maybe we want to eat less is one thing. But the other is we've got these longer daytimes, right? Now the sun is out for, 11 hours during the day. So we have more time to kind of expand when we're eating. And we still want to maintain within circadian rhythm. So I think that there's sort of a general across the board outline of, eat when the sun is up, don't eat when the sun is down. When it's dark out, don't eat. When the sun is up, eat. So in terms of seasons, right now, we're in this very interesting sandhi. We're in this very interesting little joint right in between spring and summer, right in between kapha and pitta. And in the sandhis, we get a little bit of imbalance easily comes in because it's our vulnerable place. If we think about it, let's say this is my forearm is spring, my upper arm is summer. I've got this place of vulnerability right here. And it's easy for me to find imbalance, to have difficult digestion in these special moments. So it's a good time to really lessen the amount of different foods that we're eating, to really simplify the diet, to come back to, plant-based meals, whole grains, local, seasonal, very simple foods. So for the summertime, with this season, we want to look at perhaps eating a little bit less, but we can also spread out when we're eating because we've got more daytime hours. It gives us a little bit more leeway to take time in between our meals. Most of the time, I see a lot of clients who, eat breakfast at 11 and then have lunch at 1. And that 2 hour gap really may not be enough for the digestive system to process. So to give yourself a little bit of time and space in there.
You were sharing with me before we went on that you this weekend that you came back from hiking, and do you want to describe what it was that you ate and how it tasted?
Oh my God, yes. So I went on a 10-mile hike to these beautiful hot springs out in the wilderness. And, when we arrived at the campsite, we got the campfire going and we cooked dinner. And we had like some packaged backpacking food. But the main thing that we ate were these sweet potatoes. We just threw them on the fire. They cooked for 40 minutes. No oil, no spices, nothing, just a sweet potato. And when I went to cut it open and take my first bite, it was like the most incredible thing that I had eaten. And it was so simple and so nourishing. And there was so much intention and desire and want and build up behind it that
Right.
it digested so well. It felt so good. It gave me so much energy. And I think about, how we come up with these elaborate plans for our dinner. And what would it be like to just really enjoy one sweet potato?
Yeah.
Maybe not all the time, but as a practice of,
Right. Right.
changing
Totally.
our habits.
So before we get into herbs and everything, you did touch on transition. Is there anything that you wanted to talk a little bit about transition, since we're sort of in that time period anyway, not only from the point of view of seasons, but also a lot of the country is now transitioning out of complete lockdown to a phase 1 or phase 2, and just that word transition.
Yeah, I mean, I want to quote Robert Svoboda, one of our wonderful elders in this field. And here it is. Utah posted it this morning. The key to living a satisfying life is being attentive to transitions. So the key to living a satisfying life is being attentive to transitions. And I love that. And I think that that's incredibly important in this moment because we are transitioning in so many different ways. And a lot of us can think back in our lives in moments where there was a lot of transition, whether that was because of relationships, physically, emotionally, whatever it is. They are moments of vulnerability and growth. And they also give us a foundation for the next space that we are going to be in. So if we think about this transition in between the seasons as creating foundation for your health for the summer, it's a really beautiful time to plant the seeds for greater health. So traditionally in Ayurveda, the seasonal change would be a good time to cleanse, would be a good time to, and that could mean something as simple as only eating fruits and vegetables for 2 days, right? It doesn't have to be anything too crazy. It could just be simply really cleaning up, eating blander, simpler foods to give your Agni or your digestive system a rest. We don't often in the West think about the importance of resting our digestive system. We think about doing detoxes and cleanses, and that's generally where our mind goes when we think about cleanses. But if we thought about it more about turning down how much we're intaking so that we can reset and restore our digestive fire, then it really sets us up for a season of health, a season of well-being. And that's incredibly important with all of the transition that we are experiencing globally right now.
And I think I think transition is such a difficult time because it's the hardest part of staying mindful, because you want to jump ahead. You're finished with that and you want to move ahead in that transition. And oddly enough, even in asana practice, most of injuries in yoga happen through transition from one
Mm-hmm.
asana to another, because people sort of they've done their warrior one, let's say, and they're going into trikonasana, whatever, and they forget. So it becomes a case of remembering, which I think your father said the other day, that Ayurveda really is a science of remembering. Um, so a little help for the moms who are probably on watching this, and they're going, all right, well, I've got a kapha kid, a vata kid, a pitta kid, and I've got, there's only one of me and I have to cook meals for all of them. Help! What do I do? So enter spices. So how can we help the moms in the kitchen who have family who are all different doshas. They all want to eat different things. They all want to eat at different times, and especially now with everybody home, it's a lot. Um, how can we um, help this wonderful woman in the kitchen um, keep her children, keep her family in balance so that she can peace. But using herbs and using them wisely, so
Sure.
that, yeah, and it helps the children too, I think, really begin to understand um, their bodies. Yeah, what they like, what they don't like. So,
Yeah.
sorry for
Yeah.
it.
This is always the hardest one. It's just,
Yeah.
I like to approach it kind of like a potluck, right? In which there's like a few different options. We get to eat family style, and every person is going to have a different necessity. Each person is going to need a different layout on their plate. So let's say I make some rice and I make a vegetable stew, and then I have a salad on the side. Somebody who tends more towards about the constitution might have more of the rice, none of the salad, and some of the lentils, because that's going to support them best. Somebody with the Pitta constitution might have more of the salad and then a little bit less of the rice, just because it might feel too heavy in that moment, and some lentils with it. And let's say a kappa is there, perhaps it would be better for them to stay away from the rice and just have the lentils with the salad. So I think as much as you can, it's to offer options so that each person can kind of listen to the voice that's a little bit more wise in what you need than what you're craving, because there's a difference between a hunger and a craving, between an appetite and a craving. And so you can do that with spices as well. So say you make a chutney, like a tomato, garlic, spicy chutney, right? And that is pretty supportive for a kappa. That's going to help them digest it. It's going to give them the spices that they need to stimulate their fire. It's going to give them the acidity from the tomato and the garlic, the antibacterial properties that could be helpful for them. But it's going to aggravate a pitta because it's really heating. So maybe you leave it on the side and the kapha takes more, the pitta takes none, and the vata person may take a little bit, right? And so that changes in the seasons, which is why it's so important to buy your produce locally and organically at farmers markets if possible, so you know what's in season, because tomatoes come out in the summertime, right? Chilies come out in the summertime. It's interesting to think that some of these foods that stimulate your fire are actually growing when we have the least amount of digestive capacity. So we want to think about how we can create options for the family, and also to give ourselves a little bit of space to know that not every meal is going to be perfect for everybody, and that's okay. To give ourselves a little bit of self-compassion there. That's totally okay. We have resilient digestive systems, and a little bit of discomfort isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we try our best. We give options, and we try to encourage the people in our lives to make the better decisions for themselves. So I think buying your produce locally so you know what is actually good for a system because it's growing, so we can trust the earth's wisdom in that to create options, and to maybe guide a little bit if your family's receptive to that, of like what you think might be beneficial for each person, because we're all so unique. Does that make sense?
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. And I think the when to eat actually comes a little bit into this as well. And I seem to remember hearing from almost every workshop I've ever been to with Ayurveda is you eat when you're hungry. And it's really interesting because I remember that kind of stopped me in my roots, in my tracks,
Mm.
whatever you want to call it. When I heard that, I was like, oh, wow, what a concept. Am I really hungry? Because I think that a lot of us here in the West really don't wait until we're hungry. We just go, oh, it's 12 o'clock, I have to eat, or oh, it's whatever, I have to eat. without really sitting and thinking, am I really hungry? And if I'm not that hungry, then how do I adapt that? I should do something for sustainability for my body, but yeah. So in a sense, you just answered that question beautifully as well. So
Right. Yeah, I think it's to listen to your own body's wisdom there, and then also, if you don't have an appetite, to look at the herbs that might help to stimulate it. So things like ginger, right? Something really simple of just taking fresh ginger, chopping it up, and maybe having it with a little bit of honey 20 minutes before your meal could stimulate your appetite. Or having a cup of ginger tea. Um, other herbs that do that or could help with that would be cumin. I know Amadea mentioned CCFT, cumin, coriander, fennel. That's a great one for stimulating appetite. Peppermint actually can stimulate appetite. And some of my favorites, like Western herbs, is lavender. It's a digestive astringent. And so a lavender tea can actually stimulate your appetite as well. So say you feel like your digestive system is pretty sluggish, you're gaining weight easily, you never feel hungry, you're kind of full. Any one of those could be really beneficial for the digestive system. Black pepper can do that. Cinnamon can help with that. We have a spice in Ayurveda called pipali. It's long pepper. That does that really well as also.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I found at the market last 2 weeks ago, I think it was lavender mint. It was it was amazing. It was like this purple mint with lavender flower. It was,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so it's really interesting right now because in the springtime, you'll start to notice that yellow and purple or gold and purple tend to grow a lot right now. So we see a lot of lavender, we see a lot of calendula. And I was just reading in a book that actually the reason those two plants grow right next to each other, those two colors, is that they make plants more attractive to pollinators. So
Oh,
to bees and butterflies, they become more attractive to pollinators. And it's really interesting to think about things that are typically kind of yellow, like calendula, help with the lymphatic system. They help move, right? And then lavender, these purples, they have a kind of astringent. So those two together are really powerful for the digestive system. So if you go out hiking and you see those colors, and then you go to the farmer's market, buy the same colors.
yeah. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
the,
Exactly.
yeah.
And yeah. And if you don't have a farmer's market near you, just look at what's front and forward in the store. I mean, they're going to be putting out what's in season, even if it did travel 100 miles. Um, they'll do their best.
Yeah,
So
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say, I've been reading a little bit that there's been a huge resurgence of gardening during the pandemic, and I think that that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I I I texted a friend of mine who lives in Utah, and I asked her if she had any nurseries up near her. I think you know her, Lise Mitchell, and and she came back with some names, and I called them and asked them if they had starters because I felt like I was a little too late right now for seeds, and I'm kind of, my son is building this incredible bed for me. Anyway, long story short, out, completely out. No greens, no
Mm.
herbs, no nothing. So bad news for me, but actually good news for everybody because people are gardening. I mean, they just said they can't keep everything in stock. They just can't. It's amazing. So it's really good. Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm very, very happy. So even if my garden has to wait a little bit, I'm thrilled that is the cause. Um, yeah, it's wonderful. So, is there anything in our last few minutes together, when you think of food, is there anything that you want to share?
Sure. I think one of the most important, wonderful things about Ayurveda is that it gives us a felt sense approach to food. So we all kind of have an intuitive knowledge that food can have qualities. And I know that that sounds esoteric, but let's just say like a cucumber feels cold and a pepper feels hot, right? There's this very simple kind of qualitative feeling that we all have about food. And so if you can kind of track where that lands in your body. So let's say like, oh, okay, cucumber feels cold. I can kind of feel that in my digestive system. Or pepper, when I think about eating a pepper, I notice like, oh, I might start to sweat, right? That hot and cold paradigm is really important, especially when you're pairing spices. Because let's say you want to mix ginger, which is hot, with cilantro, which is cool. those are complementary, right? But let's say I wanted to do ginger and chilies and black peppers and cinnamon and cloves. I've got 4 or 5 hot herbs. I'm really going to burn myself up. Yeah. So, so we were talking about herbs, and you mentioned like herbs de Provence, right? And I looked at some of the ingredients, and so a few places do it with fennel and oregano and basil and cilantro, and they have this mix of hot and cold because oregano is a warming spice, fennel is a cooling spice. So if we can, it might sound a little out there, but we all do have that understanding. If we can start to listen a little bit differently to what we're eating and how it feels rather than what we think about it, it allows us to have a greater understanding of what's good for us. And it can just be as simple as like hot and cold. It doesn't have to be much more complicated than that.
That's awesome. Yes, you were sharing before we came on, simple, simple, simple. And that seems to be the message from everybody this month on food, is just keep it simple.
Yeah, I remember studying with Claudia Welch, and she said it over and over. When life is complicated, eat simple. When life is complicated, eat simple. And I think a pandemic is a little complicated. Eat simple.
Interesting and challenging, and but not my favorite expression, but it's all good. In fact, it's really an expression I don't like, but it is all good because we are all learning so much. We're having to dig really deep. So we're gardening in many more ways than just soil. Yeah, we're really digging into our roots and figuring out
It's
what's going
restorative. It's
on.
very restorative. A couple weeks ago, I was in the garden tilling the entire soil, and there were so many weeds in there, and I had to spend weeks just pulling out old dead roots from the soil. And now I've got a full garden going. 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't have known that that was possible.
Yep. And on a personal level, that's what this pandemic is doing to us. We're just sort of pulling out these things that no longer serve us. And it's lovely. So that's why that transition. So if you have a chance, I think you all know Utah, and she has her Facebook. She did share Robert Swoboda's article on transition, and it is worth reading because it's really quite beautiful. And I think it's an important time for all of us to really go, okay, we kind of know where we want to go. We know what we want, and we need to just stay very mindful right now. So Anjali, thank you so, so much. Anjali is in LA. She is an Ayurvedic practitioner. She would love to hear from you. You can reach her through Rooted Rasa. So I put her it's under the host chat. Now I wonder why that doesn't come up. Um, her website is Rooted Rasa. So that's ROOT for Tom, ED for David, RAS for Sam A. So rootedrasa.com. And you can reach her that way. And I'm sure she will be delighted to hear from you. And if you're in LA, give yourself an absolute treat and have an Abhyanga and Chirodara with her. I can't imagine anything more delightful right now. So just like, yes, it's 104 outside here. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so, so much. So appreciate you being with us. And
Mm.
everybody else, next month is all about yoga therapy. We'll start with John Kepner, who's the executive director of the International Association of Yoga Therapy, to give us some wisdom as to why was the word therapy added to yoga? Why did that become necessary? And then Michael Lee, who opened up the second yoga therapy school here some 20 plus years ago, works very, very, very heavily right now with the mind. His school is absolutely beautiful, Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy. Um, and then we have Arun Deva, who just happens to be Anjali's father, who is an Ayurvedic yoga therapist, and he's going to really talk about the importance of the practice of both Ayurveda and yoga, especially when we're talking about yoga therapy. And then we end with Justine Shelton, who is a yoga therapist, a certified IAYT yoga therapist. Her passion is anatomy. There's not too much that she doesn't know about anatomy, and she has tremendous videos, etc., on the spine and the back, etc., etc. And she'll be joining us at the end. So that's our month of June. Thank you, Anjali, for wrapping up our month of May. This is just a beautiful treat, and we all wish you a belated happy birthday by one day. And thank you for sharing your first day in the third decade of yours with us.
Thank you, and what an honor to be here with such an amazing crew of wonderful women. I feel so honored.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you, everybody. Take care of yourself, please. Be safe, be smart, be healthy, be wise. We will see you next week. Om Shanti.